Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for watching, and if you do like these MKULTRA videos, I beg you to subscribe, to hit that subscribe button, and you'll simply be notified the next time I upload a video. So today we're going to talk about the Montreal mind control experiments through MKULTRA, and that is Subproject 68. I want to give you a trigger warning. I'm not used to giving trigger warnings being, oh my gosh, I'm in my late 40s. I mean, very late 40s. So I'm not used to giving trigger warnings to people, but I'm going to do it. If you are sensitive to hearing about humans in uncomfortable positions, humans being used as lab rats, any kind of torture, then maybe this isn't the video for you. But if you're gonna stick around and listen, let's get into it. The Allen Memorial Institute was once held in high regard at a stone Gothic mansion known as Raven's Crag. I mean, could you get any more creepier? There was a teaching hospital for McGill University in Montreal. At least 9 recorded patients, but probably upwards of 50 people at least, went in for various ailments, but ended up tortured. These patients received ECT, sleep therapy, and were drugged with LSD. While drugged on LSD, they were inundated with psychic driving, which is the repetition of messages over and over and over and over. And to add insult to injury, these people went in for help, to be cured, for therapy. They paid for their treatment. It wasn't free. And they got treated like lab rats and were tortured. In this video, I'm going to show you how these Montreal mind control experiments were really the result of the US's CIA's interference and funding at this hospital. Would it have gone on without any interference by the CIA? Who knows? Who knows how far Dr. Cameron and co. would have gone? But like I had mentioned in previous videos, for these top secret projects at the CIA, they handpicked the doctors that they chose to invite into the projects. They had to have the right ethics or lack thereof. And Dr. Cameron came on their radar, and here's how. Dr. Cameron published an article in the American Journal of Psychiatry, and Dr. Gittinger saw the article and invited him to apply for funding. So if you're a doctor or a researcher or a scholar and you write a paper and it ends up in one of these board journals or one of these fancy journals, and then someone with funding says, hey, I loved your paper, why don't you apply for funding? Usually you're going to get the funding because usually the board is small that votes for the funding on these foundations. And if they're already interested in you, your foot is beyond in the door, you're in the door. You just have to not screw up. So basically, you've got Dr. Gittinger at the CIA. They know they have this MKULTRA project and all these sub-projects that they're looking to do different things. So they have to pick the right kind of person for it. He reads this paper and thought, I wonder if Dr. Cameron's perfect for this. I wonder, let's see. So Dr. Gittinger invites Dr. Cameron to apply for these funds, and the funds for the project were channeled through the CIA front known as the Society for the Investigation of Human Ecology. It's SIHE is his acronym. You will find SIHE as the cutout agency in many of these sub-projects where the money came from. There's a couple cutout agencies, but it is one of the main ones. Cameron applies and promptly receives a grant of $60,000, and that is a lot of money back then. That is a heck of a lot of money. Also, McGill University received a $35,000 grant to the psychiatry department there, so everybody's bread is being buttered. The psychiatry department was also headed by Cameron, so all the bases are covered. The CIA did not ask any of Cameron's colleagues about his work. Whatever research they did to check into him, we don't know because all those files have been shredded, but after the fact, a lot of his colleagues were deposed, put under oath, had the screws put to them, as to what the CIA asked them about this guy before they hired him to do this black project. But they said, Nobody ever asked me about him. Yeah. Cameron was originally from Scotland from birth, but he was a naturalized U.S. citizen. So there's a wrinkle in this. He was living over the border in New York. So although he went to Canada and did his job in Canada, homie went back over the border to go home every night. So he was an American citizen. He was not a Canadian citizen. So there you would wonder, why in the world would a Canadian doctor do this to his own people? He wasn't Canadian, he was American. So every week, he commuted from Albany to Montreal and back. And if you really want to let the conspiracy theorists go crazy, here you go. Years previous, Dr. Ewen Cameron was on a team performing a psychological evaluation on Rudolf Hess at the Nuremberg trials. If you didn't know, that's the trial wherein the Nazis were sentenced for war crimes. Yeah, that was another reason, in my opinion, they thought well of Ewen Cameron. I don't know if it was what he asked Hess. I don't know what it was, but they were interested. Why is there this tie-in with these Nazi experiments? I will further in other videos get into this with you. You cannot, after you look at enough of the information, and I'm not saying it's all the Nazis, I'm not saying that, but there's definitely an undercurrent or a sympathy with the Nazi ideology. It's either just a natural tendency towards those sort of evil inclinations, or because they were influenced by them, or because they were infiltrated by them. However crazy you want to take it, but there is a tie-in with the Nuremberg evaluations. Just saying. So years later, after he'd performed a psychological evaluation on Hess for the Nuremberg trials, he becomes involved in our MKUltra experiments. And I asked myself, did Ewen Cameron learn nothing? Did he learn nothing from the actions of the tribunal at the Nuremberg trials? Or did he just want to make a name for himself at any cost? Why would you do that? Knowing that you interviewed this guy, this Hess, and you talked to him about the psychological experiments, and you turn around and maybe use some of the ideas on Canadian patients? Were you doing it because you thought it was a good idea? Are you doing it because someone paid you to do it? Were you doing it because you wanted to make a name for yourself eventually? Why? It's a mystery. He was described by an employee. The employee was called Dr. Elliot Emanuel, so another doctor. He was called authoritarian, ruthless, power-hungry, nervous, tense, angry, and other negative qualities. So this guy was a winner, man. He was a winner chicken dinner. Whenever it came to his employees, they didn't really have a lot of good words in their mouths for him. Was this because they were interviewed years after? I don't know. Usually people distance themselves from people that kind of are like, you're evil, you know? They kind of be like, I didn't know him, I didn't like him, you know, who knows? But authoritarian, ruthless, power-hungry, nervous, tense, angry, and other negative qualities. Oh, okay. Dr. Cameron was known for de-patterning. That's using drugs and ECT and psychic driving, which was the repetition of messages. So that was his shtick. He liked this. This was his forte, which fits perfectly into one of the sub-projects for MKUltra. Oh my gosh, this just sounds wonderful. We're doing testing on LSD in this project, and we're doing testing on scopolamine in another project, and we're doing, ECT in this one. This guy does it all. He combines it all. It's great. His sleep cocktail that he would use to get people into this comatose sleep state consisted of, catch this, 100 milligrams of thorazine, 100 milligrams of Nembutal, 100 milligrams of Seconal, 150 milligrams of Vernal, and 10 milligrams of Phenagan, which was essentially a coma cocktail. That's what the state of mind the patient was put into before the torture was applied. Many of Dr. Ewen Cameron's papers ended up at the American Psychiatric Association. And what I mean by this is when someone passes away and they feel that they're of great renown, you know, and I'm not taking away that the guy did have some kind of credentials. They take all their paperwork, their history of work, published documents, books, you know, ephemera, whatever, and they put it all together, and sometimes they send it as a collection to a library, an association, whatever. And that's what Dr. Cameron did. So it gave people the opportunity after the fact to go pilfering through his records, some of which weren't shredded, to see what kind of experiments he did. What kind of a man was he? What did he think? And what some of these papers showed is Dr. Cameron's penchant for injecting some of his patients with a non-lethal dose of Curare. In addition to all this comatose cocktail, he would give them a non-lethal dosage of Curare, which causes a limited paralysis. Yeah. So his reasoning behind giving a patient Curare, and he called it curarized, was so that they would avoid twitching and to remain still during the ECT so as not to fracture their bones. And sometimes, if he wasn't going to give them the benzo type cocktail that I mentioned earlier, he would induce an insulin coma, which, I mean, arguably, which is more dangerous? All those other drugs that could kill Marilyn Monroe 10 times over if not observed properly, or the insulin coma? I don't know, but the insulin coma and Curare, or all those other drugs and Curare, it's like, oh my gosh, seriously. And here's where it starts getting really dark, as if the lights haven't already started going down in this story. He hoped that by erasing existing methods through the ECT, that's the convulsions, the electro-convulsive therapy, it's shocking you. And what it does is it makes you, I think, your brain synapses restart essentially, and it basically makes you lose your short-term memory, but it can cause damage if it's not done correctly. So he's putting you in this sleep coma almost. He's giving you Curare so you don't twitch around, you don't move, and he's giving you ECT, and it's causing so much. He's giving you so much ECT that it's almost, he has to make sure that you don't twitch around because you could break your bones. So he had hoped that by erasing existing memories through the ECT and reprogramming the psyche through psychic driving, he could correct schizophrenia. Okay, all right, so now we're down to the meat of it. So we talk about noble motives. So here, he looks to correct schizophrenia. He thinks that doing all these things will fix schizophrenia. He's not looking to just go in and take a normal person and make them a mind control robot to change how they think about things. He's just looking to take someone that's having trouble functioning in society because they're schizophrenic and fixing them. So that's the noble motive for the record. So his proposal was to break down the ongoing patterns of the patient's behavior by means of a particularly intensive electroshock. So as I recall, the Page Russell shock treatment was like the standard. It gave, you know, the parameters of what is useful for a human and what could be damaging, and, you know, keep it within a normal range, which would be normally administered once or twice per week. Okay, but Dr. Cameron, he used it 2 or 3 times per day on these patients. Dr. Peter Roper said that Dr. Cameron's depatterning resulted in the loss of a patient's ability to orient themselves. That means to know where they are, to look around and know where they are, to be oriented to their surroundings. They didn't know where they were. Sometimes they would not know their age. The depatterning left the patient in an animal-like state. So under Dr. Cameron's care, his patients received variations of the following: excessive shock treatment, the use of drugs, Curare, he used bulbocapnine if sometimes it was like a Curare, the LSD, the sleep cocktails, and then the psychic driving, which I'm going to get into. Psychic driving was tape-recorded messages, and some were culled from the patient's own interviews. And a patient would be sleeping or in a drug coma, And the messages were transmitted to them approximately 250,000 times. The messages were repeated for 16 hours a day for at least 6 to 7 days. The intensive repetition of prearranged verbal signals while the patient was in a, quote, partially sensory isolation was achieved through sleep rooms, with audio messages in the headphones they were wearing, and speakers under their pillows. So you couldn't get away with it. You couldn't get away from it. You couldn't shut it out. It was there. And I think he even developed a sleep helmet that had the headphones in the sleep helmet, and it was just like over and over the same crappy message. So to talk a little bit about some of these messages, he wanted to tear somebody down to build them back up again. That was kind of the thought process. Like a schizophrenic, he felt like they needed to have their bad messages, thought patterns, whatever, torn down. And then he, the good crazy doctor he was, he would put in the good messages, or what he wanted the schizophrenic to do and think and believe. So in theory, you could take someone that's having a minor ailment that came in for treatment. Maybe they were depressed because they lost a child and felt like they hadn't been a good mother while they were pregnant. So they're depressed because of that. So he's going to take them, put them in this sleep paralysis, give them ECT, which is going to make them lose their short-term memory, which might help them with their depression. But then he's going to use their initial interviews where they're telling him, I just feel like a bad mother. I just feel like a bad mother. And he's going to have that repeated over and over and over into their heads to break them down. And then once they're almost, like they said, an animal-like or feral or vegetative state, he's going to build them back up with other messages. That is so sick that I don't think people believed it. I think when this got out, that people just couldn't fathom that it really happened, and it did. There's a quote here. Repetition of a key phrase uttered by the patient in taped interviews caused, as he wrote, discomfort, embarrassment, aversion, and resentment. In all this storm of emotion, he reasoned, must lie insight. He had a technician create a loop in tapes so that he could play back to the patient 30-second long repetitions of significant things he or she had related to the doctor. The CIA's former chief psychologist, John Gittinger, Dr. Gittinger is the CIA's former chief psychologist for this time, that he had monitored Dr. Cameron's methods. Of course he did. He was the one that told him to get involved in this and then gave him money through the Cutout organization. Dr. Gittinger said that Cameron's idea was to, quote, was to put this bit of a subjects interview that was taped on a round band that went around in circles in a football helmet, and that would say over and over again the actual words that the individual had said. And if someone listened to this long enough, it would represent some kind of a breakdown. Not a breakthrough, or a breakthrough of the patient's denial. So if they felt that the patient was in denial about something, they would take that comment and just beam them at them orally for 6 to 7 days, 250,000 times. Is that not the craziest thing you've ever heard? Want to talk about brainwashing. This is like the apex of brainwashing. So the patients commonly experience 10 days of negative messages followed by 10 days of positive messages. Aww. The patients were kept drugged out, even through the positive messages. They were left unsupervised, and they were awakened only for their ECT treatment. If they freaked, they were left to scream it out. It didn't matter to Cameron that a patient was even pregnant. That was a good patient to have. Didn't matter. That didn't disqualify you for the program. And conveniently, Cameron's records only listed his patients by their code names. So let that sink in too. If you're really doing something above board, wouldn't you put the patient's name on a file? Dr. Ormond M. Solant took a dim view of Cameron's methods after the wife of one of Solant's associates sought and received Cameron's treatment. Let that sink in. You have a doctor, and the doctor's associate's wife You like, okay, you know, you don't know yet that this stuff is horrible. So you're like, you know, Dr. Cameron, you know, go see him. And Dr. Salant said, quote, "It was my view at the time and continues to be that Cameron was not possessed of the necessary sense of humanity to be regarded as a good doctor." A lawsuit revealed much of the damage Dr. Cameron wreaked. And you know, through a lot of this MKUltra drama and of everything coming to light, you really got to give a hand to our judicial system. A lot of the times, the reason that this stuff has come out is due to lawsuits. So it's a good thing. It really is. Sometimes it's a good thing, and it can hold people's feet to the fire where they could claim that they didn't have to be accountable. Jean-Charles Page went to the university here at Ravenscrag for alcoholism and to be detoxed. Was he schizophrenic? No. He was bombarded with the following psychic drivage messages in his treatment. Quote, "I do not trust women. You feel small and inferior. You are unable to compete with others." So when he's going in there, he's got alcoholism, he's going to be detoxed, and they talk, you know, what do you think's causing you your need to drink? And he's like, you know, you don't trust women, you feel small and inferior, you know, I'm unable to compete with other men, you know, that kind of stuff. It's recorded and put on a loop for 6 to 7 days to go through your brain. You think that's going to make you break down? I think so. Robert Logie, I think it is pronounced Logie, then only 18 years old, went to the university in October of 1956. He had an arthritic leg, which caused him restless leg syndromes while he slept. So this is why he presented to the hospital. This is why he presented to the university. It wasn't schizophrenia. He had restless leg syndrome. His sleeping problems were deemed to be psychosomatic. Oh, now we've got a reason to get in there and get him in some psychic driving because he's got some psychosomatic illnesses. Let's break this down. Let's have a breakthrough, right? Logie likened the experiment to a, quote, mental rape. He was given 70 to 100 times the normal dosage of ECT, coupled with truth serum. So now we got, I mean, what kind of Nazi doctors are these? Now you're going to put truth serum in there? I mean, truth serum's not going to hurt you per se, but this is just the kind of stuff the Nazis did. You had a guinea pig. It's like, you know what? Let's give them this. Oh, let's give them this. Let's give them this and that. You just don't care for their welfare at all. And LSD on top of it. So we got ECT, truth serum, and LSD. So Logie said the worst part was the psychic driving. It wasn't LSD. It wasn't the ECT. It was a psychic driving. He was put into a drug-induced state for 23 days. He heard the same message 16 hours a day, quote, "You killed your mother." He had not. He had not killed his mother. But yet they put a message, "You killed your mother," to play in his head. I just can't. Another message repeated, quote, "You are getting smaller and smaller." Logie tried to escape. So he was like, you know what? Restless leg or not, I'm out of here. But it didn't work, and he suffered reoccurring nightmares after the fact, severe depression, and was emotionally haunted. Oh, you think? I think you'd start thinking you'd killed your mother if you had to hear it that many times in your head. He was interviewed by this great Canadian program. I think it's still on today. It's called The Fifth Estate. It's sort of like a Dateline or a 2020, and the Canadians have had The Fifth Estate forever. And by the way, if you ever just want to go on a YouTube binge and you like true crime or anything that's even fascinating with science and stuff, The Fifth Estate is awesome. So anyway, he told The Fifth Estate that he felt completely used. Yeah, and couldn't sleep normally anymore. And he said, quote, "Guinea pigs have feelings." After all that drama, you know what Robert Logie needed? He needed a freaking cortisone shot in his leg. That's all he needed. Because then once he got out and I got it all together, a cortisone shot in his legs fixed that restless leg syndrome. A woman, Dr. Mary Morrow, she came to the university to attempt a fellowship in psychiatry. So here you got someone who wants to, get a foot in the door with Dr. Cameron. He's doing great things, Dr. Cameron told her she looked tired and to get some sleep therapy first before she would get a fellowship with him. So she submitted to him. She wants this fellowship, right? So she's like, okay, I'll do some sleep therapy with you. Anybody was a good enough guinea pig for him. He didn't really care. She received 67 times the average amount of ECT, which left her with permanent brain damage. And she said, quote, after the fact, quote, I had no idea I was a human being. Like, he got her to an amoebic mental state, a vegetable state. Like, she didn't even realize she was human until she started to recover years later. A lady named Janine Huard mortgaged her house to pay for her treatment with Dr. Cameron. She was programmed with statements like, quote, you are running away from your responsibility. You are no good to your children. She heard that over and over and over. Louis Weinstein went in for a mild neurosis. He returned home with physical brain damage and a complete change of personality, and he never recovered. And I don't want to speak out of turn, but this is in my opinion. I think I remember that Weinstein, he took such a change of personality that even his family didn't. I think it changed the relationships with the family because, even I think it was his son. I don't want to speak out of turn, but someone he was just so damn different. It was like it changed everything in his family. Like it'd be like putting someone else in somebody's body. I can't. That's so horrible. But it is perfect for mind control, isn't it? To change someone's personality, to break them down, to build them up the way you want them to be. So this patient is the one that helped break this thing open. Velma Val Orlikow was suffering postpartum depression. And from 1956 to 1957, she had excessive shock treatment and LSD injected into her veins. She experienced fear, terror, distortions of reality, and she completely freaked out. Her husband, David Orlikow, he was a member of Canadian's parliament. And so he helped her. After she got back and he saw the state she was in, he helped her find more victims. And then joining together, they sued all the victims that they could locate and were willing to sue. They sued the U.S. government. So that is why I can tell you so much about this subproject. Think about what I can't tell you about the other ones because all that stuff was shredded. But yes, they sued the U.S. government. She sued the Allen Institute also for $50,000 in legal costs. And she said, quote, they took away the remaining years of my life. The other plaintiffs in the lawsuit were Livia Statler. She also received nitrous oxide in her treatment. That's laughing gas, but it can make people trip. Makes me trip when I've had it. Rita Zimmerman and Floris Langleben, who was a singer. Dr. Ewen Cameron left the Institute abruptly in 1964. And in 1965, Dr. Robert A. Cleghorn took over and saw the depatterning treatment and just stopped it abruptly at the hospital. Cameron's family, Dr. Ewen Cameron's family, allegedly destroyed his records, but they didn't destroy all his papers, especially not all his papers, the kind that he would submit to the journals and things like that. So those were saved, so that is good. So not only did Cameron's patients sue the Canadian government and sue the Institute, they also sued the CIA and the U.S. government for $1 million per person for their impaired mental health and personal injury they suffered during the years. Because you got to think, they're in Canada. They had no idea this was a U.S. op until time went by and this stuff started coming to light, like I said, decades later. So the lawsuit was filed in the U.S. District Court by civil liberties crusader John L. Raw Jr. and James C. Turner. The plaintiffs allege that the CIA failed to supervise and control their employees, in this case Cameron and co., were negligent and reckless in funding hazardous experiments, and were liable for funding medical malpractice. Exactly. The lawsuit dragged on for 5 years, in part because the CIA refused to negotiate a reasonable settlement. Do you think any of these CIA folks would have allowed their dog to be subjected to these treatments? Any of these moral ones? You think they'd allow one of their children to be subjected to these treatments? Oh, heck no. I mean, come on. And they have the money, but they don't want to start a precedent. That's my opinion. You don't want to start a precedent of paying out for this stuff, because then everybody's going to come out of the woodwork, and not only are you going to have to pay them until you shut them up, when they find out somebody else got $1 million settlement, they're going to go on the news, and it's going to spread around, and then everybody's going to know what we did. See? Orlikow's attorney, James Turner, said, quote, "Records are gone. Key witnesses have died. People have moved. In the drug testing cases, people are damaged in other ways, which undermine their credibility. In which case, they're coming forward. They've had so much mental trauma to their brains. They've had so much ECT that some of their memories are wiped. Yeah, some of them seem kind of, maybe they seem forgetful. Maybe they seem a little crazy. The court recognized that all the plaintiffs suffered some mental disorder. That was on the record. The court found that Mr. Weinstein and Dr. Morrow filed their claims over the 2-year statute of limitations of actual notice. The statute of limitations included the equitable document diligent discovery rule that in the case of the defendant's fraud or deliberate concealment of material facts related to his wrongdoing, the time does not begin to run until the plaintiff's discovery by reasonable diligence could have discovered the basis of the lawsuit. I'm going to break that down for you. Let's say you get in a car accident and you hurt your back. Usually the time to sue start from when you got in a car accident. You got 2 years. Let's say that's the law. Let's say arguendo, because it's different everywhere. But let's say from the date of the car accident and you went to the hospital, then that's when the time clock starts and you have 2 years to sue. That's what the statute of limitations in this case is. I'm trying to equate it to. So now we got to go back, decades, you know what I mean? We're back in when did he scoot out of there? So let's go back in time. He leaves in 64. So you would say, oh Lord, you would have, if you were treated in 64, you would have 2 years to file suit, right? But they changed it because sometimes people don't realize they're harmed until after the fact. So what this says is, once you could have reasonably figured out, like say another person sued, or you were made, or you got a notice saying you may have been a subject of, then it restarts the clock to that point where, oh, now you know, oh my gosh, I was a part of a project I didn't know, and whatever, and then they can toll the statute of limitations to start from 2 years from that time. So they were trying to say that once they should have figured out that they were a part of this, that they'd even gone over that 2-year limit. So that's sad. Other patients sued the government. Linda McDonald, who was actually a schizophrenic, was kept in Cameron's sleep room for 86 consecutive days, accompanied by shock treatments. So you got to think about different lawsuits going on. You have a lawsuit against Cameron. You have a lawsuit against McGill by Canadians. Then they figured out years later, and they tried to sue the U.S. government and the CIA because we funded these projects. We put him in, we got him in there, we got him doing it. We gave him the money. We told him what to do because he took the money on this project. And if they were within the 2-year statute of finding out that they were part of it, not 2 years from when it happened, because they've made the statute of limitations rules wider for once you discovered you were hurt. From that point, like say other people from your group suing and you should have known because it was in the public arena or something. You had 2 years from that point, and sadly some of the people had gone over even that because this happened so long before. So another patient sued the government, Linda McDonald. She was actually a schizophrenic, and she was kept in Cameron's sleep room for 86 consecutive days, accompanied by the shock treatments too. She was unable to sue the U.S. government because of the statute of limitations, but she did receive a settlement from the Canadian government. Just like anything in law, if you've got many people involved, you just sue everybody and you see where it sticks, and sometimes people fall out, and then sometimes, the biggest pockets is the one you end up getting the money from. Sometimes the biggest, and sometimes you don't get it from the wrongdoer, the most liable, the most complicit party. But so the Canadian government, she did get some money from them. Hilda Bernstein was a victim who also appeared in that Fifth Estate documentary, said the experiment she suffered in 59 severely damaged her memory. She believed she underwent depatterning for 3 weeks. When it was over, she couldn't remember her family, and she asks, "Why pick on me?" Hi everyone, sorry for the continuity errors, but my battery died. I thought I was done. You film for a couple hours and you think that you're done, and then guess what? Your battery's dead. Gail Kastner, who was another one of Dr. Cameron's patients in 1953, she went in as a 19-year-old depressed honor student and left in a childlike state, sucking her thumb, being bottle fed, and peeing on the floor. Her well-to-do family even disowned her. A federal judge in Canada awarded her $100,000. In a deposition, it was revealed that the CIA's Dr. Gottlieb, remember Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, he was interested in retrograde amnesia. Dr. Gottlieb conceded that the CIA was interested in blanking out a period of time in a person's memory. That has nothing to do with curing schizophrenia. So he was willing to even admit that, yeah, we were interested in mind control. A follow-up study of some of the patients showed that they suffered amnesia from anywhere from 6 months to 10 years. Some came home with the mental age of a toddler, with no memory of a spouse or children. They were childlike, and some were incontinent. A follow-up study of some of the patients showed that they suffered from amnesia from anywhere from 6 months to 10 years. And again, that would explain why the statute of limitations being extended were so important. Because if you have amnesia for 10 years, you're not going to be able to be a good candidate to sue. If, you're just going to not know. And then once you realize, after you've gotten control of yourself again, then you have this 2-year one starting from the point you realized you were damaged, harmed. So some came home with the mental age of a toddler, with no memory of a spouse or children. They were childlike, and some were even incontinent. These victims span the globe. Lest we think that the other projects were in the USA and this is the only one in Canada. No. The Philadelphia Inquirer wrote, quote, "Allegedly such CIA finance programs were conducted not only in the US and Canada, but also in European countries." David Orlikow, who was the husband, the parliamentarian, he wrote a letter to the editor to the Washington Post of April 25th, 1985. And in it, he wrote, quote, "Long before my wife and 8 other Canadian victims of MKULTRA sued the U.S. government, then CIA Director Stansfield Turner publicly promised 2 U.S. Senate committees that the CIA would begin the process of attempting to identify the individuals and determining what is essentially their proper responsibility to them. Had the CIA honored these commitments, the Canadian victims of MKUltra would not have been forced to sue for reparations, and the hundreds of other victims would have long since learned of their unwitting involvement in CIA experiments, so they could seek financial and medical and financial assistance. As for the suit by the Canadian MKUltra victims, the CIA has done everything in its power to stall in the hope that attrition will wear down my wife and the 8 other Canadians who are subjected to CIA-supported brainwashing experiments with LSD and other damaging techniques." End quote. What he's saying is, at this point, they're hoping that my wife and the other victims will die before they have to pay out. And Dr. Gittinger, and we've talked about him before, he was also interviewed for the Fifth Estate. He actually took the interview. And he said that the experiments would be, quote, ridiculous in this day and age. Dr. Gittinger, it was ridiculous in that day and age. As an example to talk about how ridiculous some of the MKUltra subprojects were, he said that the Human Ecology Fund, which was another cutout agency, paid for a study of witch doctors in Nigeria. Yeah, they did. That's a subproject. And he was saying that they're really only after the chemicals used in their hexes and zombies. But hey, it was just ridiculous. We were studying witch doctors in Nigeria trying to figure out how to make zombies. It was all so crazy. Some people, like, they want to make their point, but they just start digging their grave even harder. Like, why would you want to find out how to make a zombie, Dr. Gedinger? In a letter dated May 10th, 1983, the U.S. State Department sent the Canadian government an apology of deep regret. But in a mealy-mouthed fashion that, we're so fond of getting from the government, they asked for the apology to be kept secret. Yeah, Canada, we are so sorry about what we did to your citizens and all the harm we caused. We are so sorry. Accept our deepest apologies, but don't tell anybody. Really? I'm sorry, but that's ridiculous. In May of 1986, the Canadian Department of Justice published a report essentially placing the blame for the Canadian experiment squarely on the U.S. And what I say to that is, Canada, oh Canada, you're a part of this game too. You played the game, you're responsible, but yeah, you're right in the sense we funded that project. We got Dr. Cameron, the U.S. citizen working over there in Canada, to do our dirty work and to harm your citizens. And you should have played hardball with the U.S. once it came to light, in my opinion. And thank you to the Orca laws, I hope I said that right, that, were a member of parliament, that it was your wife that got hurt, and that you went ahead and instituted a bunch of lawsuits and found some other victims that jumped on the train to get some money, at least some satisfaction of being heard. Because there are more victims out there. They just didn't come forward, or they died, or whatever, and they were never named. So when I say 9 people, those are the 9 that were named. They were in a lawsuit. They have proof they went to that institute. They have proof. They have family members that paid for the treatment, It's there. But there are people that they're just lost to history. So if you like this video, I would appreciate it very much if you would subscribe. There's a little bell there, and if you ring that bell, you'll simply be notified next time I upload a video. And without further ado, I hope you have an excellent day, and wash your hands. Take care.